Hello everyone, welcome to the AOS-CX 10.12 update series. I am Shobna, Technical Marketing Engineer, Aruba Campus Switching. So in this video, we will see about the 10.12 enhancement feature per port radius server group assignment. So with this enhancement, we have the capability to assign the radius server group interface level. So let's hear more details about the feature. So here is the agenda for today's session. We will be covering the following topics. Overview of how the feature is introduced and then use cases the feature trying to solve, details and caveats, configuration, what are the best practices to be followed, how we can troubleshoot if there is an issue, a quick demo of how the feature works, and then the parity analysis. First is the overview. So prior to 10.12, the radius server group assignment is globally. That is, we have to go to the particular authentication method like macauth and .1x and then assign the radius server group globally. So this assignment is for the entire switch. If there is a 10-member VSF stack, all the ports in the 10-member VSF stack will try to use the only the radius server group associated globally. So with 10.12 onwards, we can have the ability to configure the radius server group assignment interface level. So we have to visit the particular interface and then for the particular authentication method, we can associate the required radius server group. So this feature will help us to do the radius server group assignment particular interface for authentication. So apart from that, what is the additional enhancement in the radius server group? So prior to 10.12, the radius server can be associated with only one group. If you try to associate the radius server with another group, the switch will throw a warning message that server is already part of a different group. So that restriction has been removed in 10.12. So with 10.12, the radius server can be associated with multiple server groups. So there should be a catch on how many groups the server can be associated. So the server can be associated up to a maximum of 5 server groups. So the 4 are user defined server group and the 1 is the default radius server group. So this enhancement is required for the customer use case. So we'll see about the customer use case in the coming slide. Use case. So let's see the first use case. Consider a education vertical, a university. So in a university, we will have different kind of users present like staffs, students and admins. So this feature really helps in access level segmentation in education vertical. So let's see how it is done. So I will be having a interface group student. So in this interface group, only the students can connect. Next, there will be an interface group staff. So in this interface group, the staffs can connect. So with the table, let's see the use case. So consider the users like I have student and then a staff, and I'm associating them to the student and then staff specific interface group. So next is NAS ID. So what is this NAS ID? So NAS ID is the network access server identifier. So it is the attribute sent by the switch to the radius server. So the radius server can identify what is the source of the radius request coming from which switch it is coming from, or which port in the switch it is coming from. So for that purpose only, this NAS ID is used by the network access control servers, that is ClearPass. So I'm associating that NAS to the particular user. So let's see the access level operations. First, a student. So when a student is connecting to the student interface group, so he will be allowed access. So next is a staff. When the staff is connecting to the staff interface group, he will be allowed access. Next, when a staff is connecting to the student interface group, so the staff has the additional privileges. So the staff can connect to a student interface group. So he will be allowed here. But next, when we see a student connecting to a staff interface group, he will be rejected because the student does not has the privilege to connect to a staff interface group. So this kind of use case was not solved earlier by our CX switches. So it was like a combination of support needed from both our switches and then the clear pass. Only then we could have solved this use case. So now with the 10.12 enhancements, we can solve this use case. Let's see how. So for that purpose, what I'll be doing is, so I'll be creating a radius server group called staff and then a radius server group called student. So in the both the radius server groups, I'm associating the same radius server. It's not like I'm using different radius servers for this use case. I'm using the same radius server. What I am trying to achieve is like I will create a radius attribute group for this particular group. And here I will configure the NAS ID value as for the staff, the NAS ID value will be staff. And then for the student, the NAS ID value will be student. And this radius server group attribute has to be sent in both authentication and then the accounting request, because we are trying to handle both authentication and accounting here. So only then the ClearPass will be able to do the accounting as well. Like authentication cannot go to one server and accounting to a different server. So the authentication and accounting has to reach the same server. For that purpose, I'm mentioning this value has to be sent both in authentication and then the accounting request. So with that configuration, what I will be doing next is, so I'll be creating an interface group that will be for only the students, and I'll be associating that radius server I have configured for the student in the student interface group, both for .NX and Mac authentication. So based on the end devices the students is bringing in. So as I said earlier, so this cannot be achieved only with switch configurations. We need a configuration even in the ClearPass for able to solve this problem. So for that purpose, what I will do is I will create a service for student, like university student service. Here, I'll make the check that this service will only service request if the NAS identifier equals NAS ID student. So that is what I have given as a value here. Like NAS ID value should be NAS ID student. So if the NAS ID value is staff, this service will not be servicing any request for that client. It will be rejecting. Similarly, for the staff group as well, I'll be connecting a staff. There I will try to configure the interface level parameters like for .NX and Mac authentication, try to associate with the radius server group staff. Similarly, in the ClearPass, I will create a one more service called staff service, and here I will add a condition check like when the NAS identifier equals NAS ID staff based on the configuration present in the switch. Only then service request for this staff serve. So that's how we could able to achieve this use case. So we are making sure based on the radius server configurations in the interface level, this correct service is picked up in the ClearPass. So the NAS ID is helping in identifying the correct service. So let's see the what other use case this feature can help in. So let's consider a service provider environment. So that service provider is trying to manage multiple customers. So he has multiple customers, and these multiple customers he has in a remote data center, customer specific ClearPass policy manager he has it. And for the service provider itself, there is a service provider ClearPass policy manager. So what happens is like when we have the APs or the switches connecting to the service provider. So the service provider wants to make sure the APs and then any mini switches like 12 port switches, if they try to connect to the existing access layer switches or core switches, so those switches also and APs should be authenticated. Only then they will be allowed in the network. And those switches and APs are managed by the service provider. So those devices has to be authenticated by the service provider ClearPass. They need not to be authenticated by the customer specific ClearPass. But when the customer specific devices like for customer A, he has wired users, laptops, and then phones. So those users has to be authenticated only based on the customer's clear pass, because that customer clear pass will be having its own AD, and then the authentication mechanisms will be different based on the customer requirements. Similarly, if there is other customer, so whose devices has to be authenticated only based on the customer clear pass. So this use case can easily solve with this feature, where consider if the service provider has a 10-member VSF stack. So he can segregate like some of the ports where the APs and then many access switches are getting connected. So in those ports, he can try to configure the radius server as a service provider clear pass. And then for the customer A's switch ports, he can try to configure as customer is A clear pass, and for customer B, the customer B's clear pass. So this will be great benefit for service provider environments where they no need to trying to solve this problem by having conditions in their customer clear passes or invalid requests coming to the customer clear pass. So such drawbacks can be easily solved with this use case. So only the request originating from this port will reach the correct clear pass. So let's see the details and caveats for the feature. First, we'll see a background about the radius server groups. So totally, we can have 16 radius servers in our switch. So apart from that, we can have 28 user-defined radius server groups. So this 16 servers can be mapped to the different radius server groups. But the condition here is one radius server can be associated with 4 custom user-defined radius server groups and then one default system radius server group. So next is, so that system radius server group is the named as radius. That is the default radius server group that will contain all the radius servers configured in the switch. Like if we have 16 radius servers, so all the servers will belong to this radius default server group. So as this enhancement comes in, we can configure the radius server group for .NX and Mac authentication both at system and then the port level. So we'll see about the new enhancement for port radius server group details. So as we discussed, so this radius server group assignment is per port. So all the clients authentication requests on that port will go to the configured per port radius server group based on the authentication method. So when we have the radius server group assignment both globally, that is system level configuration, and then the port level configuration, the priority will be given only for the port level configurations. If the port level configuration is not present, only then we will move to the global per authentication configuration. It does not matter like when the per port radius server group is not reachable, we will go over to the global. So even though the per port radius server group assignment is present, and then if it is not reachable, we will not go to the global. Only when there is no such per port configuration present, we will try to go with the global radius server group configurations. So what if when the radius server group assignment is removed? Like if I'm going to the interface level and then removing the purport radius server group, then obviously the request will go to the global radius server group assignment. So this feature is supported in all the port access security enabled platforms. So all these platforms currently have port access security enablement like .NX and Mac authentication. So all these platforms will have this feature. So when we have this radius server group assignment updated after the client has been onboarded. So what happens is initially the client would have been authenticated via the global radius server group. And later on, when we try to enable this feature on the interface, and then the client is re-authenticating, then the radius request will go only through the purport radius server group assignment, not with the previous authenticated radius server group assignment. So only based on the purport assignment, the client's re-authentication request will be reaching it. So we have to make sure the interface level configuration is done before the clients are getting onboarded. So let's see the configuration. First, to associate the radius server for interface, so we have to go to the interface and interface level, specifically the MAC authentication or .NX authentication. Here we can associate the purport radius server group. So next, how this configuration can be done via REST. So here is a snippet from the UI. So this is the port level configurations. So you have to go to system interface and then the interface identifier. And for that particular interface, you have to go to the port access auth configurations. So I have done this for the MAC auth. So based on the particular auth method, we can configure the radius server group like this. Next is show commands. So when we have this radius servers associated to the group, so if we wanted to view what is the assignment present and then the priority order, so we can use this show radius server detail command. So this command will show the radius server details here, the server group association. So this radius server is associated with 3 groups. Maximum it can be associated with 4 groups. Here it is associated with 3 groups. And then how the association has happened. So group one, it is priority one. Like in the group one, first, this is the server that will be present. So any request in the group one will reach this server first. In group two, this server is configured as a third server. With group 3, this server is configured as a second server. So such priority we can view easily using this show radius server detail show command. So next is how we can check the purport radius server group assignment. So there is no dedicated show command for this. We can use existing show run interface or show run port access related configurations for it. So when we use this show run interface, it will display like show the configurations of the radius server group assignment. So as we have seen with CLI, let's see with REST how we can get the radius server assignment. So this is a port level configuration. So you have to go to system interfaces and then the particular interface, and you have to give which authentication methods radius server group do you want to view. So I am selecting here MAC auth. So when we execute it, so this will be the output for the REST get. Like it will show the particular authentication methods REST API call output for the here it is MAC-auth, and then it will show the radius server group assignment as the configured purport radius server group. So next we'll jump to the best practices. So first is, as I said earlier, we have to configure the NAS ID request type as both, like authentication and accounting. So only then the correct radius server it will hit, because the accounting cannot log in if there is no authentication happen in that particular server. So that's the reason the NAS ID value should be present with both as the type, authentication and accounting. Next, it is always advisable like the before the client onboards, the configuration of the purport radius server group has to be done. So only then it has can reach the correct radius server, or else next reauthentication request, it will lose the postering status of the client and it will not be assigned with the correct rule assignment. Let's see the troubleshooting part. First, let's troubleshoot with the radius server group. Like we can check it out whether the radius server in which we have configured the requests are going or not. So for that purpose, I'll be using a debug. So debug port access all I'll be enabling, and I will check whether the particular client's radius request where it is going. So the debug will clearly show like this is the MAC-auth request for this client, and this client's radius request is being triggered with an identifier as well to this radius server in the group mention. So with that debug, we can say like the configuration is correct, the requests are correctly sent to the configured radius server assignment in the interface level. So even though the configurations are correct in the CLI, but still when we are not getting the request to the correct server, the next step would be to check the database. So here is the dump of the AAA server group assignment. So here I will try to identify first the UID of the group. Like for the particular group, I will identify the group UID and then we'll check it out whether that group is associated with this Radius server or not. So this is only for checking the Radius server assignment to the Radius server group, whether by any chance the Radius server is not correctly associated to the group or not. So this debugging will help us in the Radius server group assignment and then troubleshooting whether the Radius request is correctly sent or not. Next is troubleshooting with NAS ID. So as we seen, NAS ID is really important for the ClearPass to identify the source of the radius request. So only then the correct service will be serviced for the clients. So for that purpose, if you wanted to check that, we can do a packet capture from the ClearPass. So we can run a packet capture, and in the packet capture, we can see for each access request what is the NAS identifier sent. So here I'm sending it as NAS ID stuff. So then it is clear like switch is correctly sending the NAS ID. Then we have to debug only from ClearPass what is the issue, why the ClearPass is unable to identify and service the request for this NAS ID type. So that will be our next step. So in case if this is itself is not working, so we can check it in database whether the NAS ID value we configured in CLI is it updated correctly or not. So for that purpose, I'll be dumping the radius config attribute table where for a particular server group I'll be doing. And here it will display the for this particular server group what is the NAS ID value. So here we can cross check whether the NAS ID from CLI is correctly enabled in the database or not. So next is the demo part. So in this demo, I'll be using a three-layer topology where we'll have the access switch and then access level I have configured. So it's a two-member VSF. I'll be using two ports, 1151 for the student and 2151 for the staff. So here is the minimum configuration that will be required in the access switch. So I'll be configuring the radius server group as staff and then again a radius server group called student. I'll be associating my same ClearPass for both the groups. And for these groups, I'll be creating a radius attribute group and I'll be giving the values as correspondingly NAS ID staff and student. So interface level, the configurations will be like for the student group, it will be a radius server associated with student. And for the staff, it will be the radius server associated as staff. So let me share my other screen. Let me log into the switch. So as explained in the slide deck, so I'll be configured the radius server and then associated to the groups. And similarly, so I have created a config group for the particular staff group. I have given an NAS ID value as staff and for student, it is student. And given a NAS ID request type as both for these groups. So let's see the interface level configuration. So interface level, the first port is a student port, the second port is a staff port. I have enabled MAC authentication and then associated their corresponding radius server groups. So let me go to the ClearPass and showcase the ClearPass configuration. For the demo purpose, I have created two host lists. So first is the staff list. So here I have mentioned like if it's a staff, this is the MAC address of staff. So based on the customer use case, like if it's AD, they can easily identify it's a student or the staff. So here for the student, I have given a static MAC address. So next we'll jump to the services. So first let's see the student service. So here I have given the condition like the NAS identifier should be equal to NAS ID student. Only then this service should be servicing the request from those clients. And then we'll go to the enforcement. So here what I have mentioned is by default you have to deny the user access. Only when the condition matches, the user will be provided access. So when the connection client MAC address belongs to group student, you can provide the university student profile. There the student specific rule assignment will be present. And next for the, if the connection client MAC address belongs to group staff, then the staff related enforcement profile, which will contain the staff role, will be present. Since it is a student service, even the staff can be allowed to access that port. That's the reason we have given both the student and then the staff conditions here. If these condition does not matter, then we will apply the default profile, deny access profile. So next we'll see the staff service. So here also I have given the condition NAS and device should be equal to NAS ID staff, and then the enforcement. So here only the staff is the condition given. Like when connection client MAC address belongs to staff, then apply the staff related profile, or else by default deny all the other users. So only the staff can connect to the staff enforcement groups. So let's go back to switch. So currently there is no clients. I have not onboarded them. So I'll try to run this command. So I'm using Ixia for the simulation. So I'm using two MAC addresses like A0 and B0 for the staff and student. Let me run the protocols and onboard the clients. So currently, as we have seen, like the A0 belongs to the student and the student has enrolled in the student port, and then staff has enrolled in the staff port. This is a allowed condition. So there is no failure here. So let's stop the protocols and then try to move the clients. I'll try to shut the ports. And then I will exchange the client MAC addresses here. So I will reverse, like student will connect to the staff port and staff will connect to the student port. Let's see what happens now. So bring back the port. And try to onboard the client. If you see in here, when the staff is connecting to the student board, the staff is allowed and given the access. But when the student is connecting to the staff port, he is not allowed access. He is in failed state. F means it is in fail. We see in show port access clients detail. First, the staff is allowed in the student port. It is role status applied. But when the student is connecting to the staff port, it is authentication failed, server reject. So the clear pass will reject when the student is trying to connect to the staff port. So we can double check in clear pass. You see here, it is reject from the clear pass. So applied access denied by policy, it is allowed only with a reject profile. That's how this feature is really helpful in a education sector where we can segregate the users easily. So we'll go back to my slide deck. So we'll see the parity analysis with our own products and competitors. So the first is with our AOS switches. So this feature is already supported in our AOS switches. So that's the reason it was requested even in our CX switches. And the configuration is like based on the authentication method and interface, we can configure and associate the radius server group. So with the COMWare switches, this feature is not supported. With Cisco switches also, we do not have this feature support where interface level we can do the radius server group assignment. With this, we have come to the end of this session. Thank you everyone for watching the video. If you have further queries, do reach out to us in our AREDS community. Bye.